Hello, boys and girls. This is Aunt Miriam's Corner, and our today's story is entitled One Gleam of Hope. How far Adam and Eve wandered from their Eden home, we are not told, but they soon noticed many changes. For one thing, they found that they needed clothes. And we read that the Lord God made coats of skins and clothed them. What wonderful coats this must have been, made with all the skill, all the thoughtfulness, all the tender pity of man's creator. Yet these coats meant death. At least one animal, possibly two, had to die that Adam and Eve might live. And so the cost of sin was brought home to them again. Many times on their journeyings, they must have talked of the good old days they had enjoyed in the glorious paradise God had given them in the beginning. Many times, too, they must have wondered whether they would ever be allowed to see it again, as again and again they went over all that had happened on that sad day when they had made their terrible mistake. One thing kept coming back to their minds. It was something God had said to the serpent. Over and over, they repeated it, wondering just what it might mean. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Whatever could this mean? One thing was certain. It meant that Eve would have children, and she was glad of that. But how much more did it mean? Well, there would be enmity or war between Eve's children and the serpent's children. Eve knew that she would never forgive the serpent for the way he had deceived her and robbed her of her lovely home. Nor would her children. She would see to that. And surely, when God said to the serpent, "It shall bruise thy head," it meant that her seed, her children, or one of them would win the conflict at last. Here, for the first time, she saw a gleam of hope. Someday, the wicked serpent, who had brought such sorrow and loss upon her and her husband, would be destroyed. Then, perhaps, God would let them go back to Eden. How they both loved this promise. It was the first promise ever made to man, and the first one mentioned in the Bible. To Adam and Eve, it was the only promise they had, and how precious it must have been to them. On dark days when everything seemed to go wrong, they remembered it and talked about it till hope sprang up in their sorrowing hearts once more. You can imagine how eagerly they looked forward to having their first baby. Perhaps he would be the one when he grew up to bruise the serpent's head. Perhaps they wouldn't have to wait very long to return to Eden after all. But when Cain was born, he did not crush the serpent. Instead, he turned out to be a big disappointment. Nor did Abel or Seth or any of their children to fulfill the promise. So the years went by, and still no one came to restore them to paradise and the tree of life. It must have been hard to keep on hoping. What was it that the Lord had in mind when he had made that promise in the garden? To whom did he refer when he spoke of the seed of the woman? He was thinking, of course, of his son, and how one day he would come to the earth as a baby, one of Eve's children, and fight the great enemy himself. As Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, he would destroy Satan and bring Adam and Eve and all who love God back to Eden. Of course, if God had said to Adam and Eve, "You will have to wait thousands of years before you see your home again. They would have been much discouraged. So he told them just enough to let them know that all would be well at last. This cheered their poor, sad hearts and led them to keep on hoping. And men have passed on the same blessed hope from one to another down the ages. This is how it came about that all the people who loved God, even in those far off times, began looking forward to the coming of Jesus. This is why Enoch, the seventh from Adam, said, "Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all." Today, the same hope is ours. Everywhere, boys and girls who love Jesus are looking eagerly for his return. For when he comes, the promise that God made to Adam will be fulfilled. And that old serpent, called the devil, will be destroyed. Then, too, Eden, beautiful, glorious Eden, will be restored, and the children of God will live there in perfect happiness forever.